The fluorescent lights of Presbyterian Hospital flickered overhead as Clarissa Martinez wiped down her last patient's bedside table. Her scrubs, once crisp and white at the beginning of her 12-hour shift, now bore the telltale stains of another grueling night in the ER. Coffee, antiseptic, and something she preferred not to identify had left their marks on the fabric and on her spirit. "Another double?" asked Janet, her colleague, as they walked toward the employee exit together. The morning sun was already painting the Chicago skyline in shades of gold and amber, a beautiful sight that Clarissa barely registered through her exhaustion. "Bills don't pay themselves," Clarissa replied, her voice hoarse from hours of coordinating with doctors, comforting patients, and managing the controlled chaos that was the night shift. At 28, she carried herself with the weariness of someone much older, her shoulders permanently curved from years of bending over hospital beds and her own worries. The parking garage echoed with their footsteps as they made their way to their cars. Clarissa's 2015 Honda Civic sat between a gleaming BMW and a pickup truck that had seen better days. A perfect metaphor for her place in the world, she often thought. Middle ground, trying to make it work with what she had. "You sure you're okay to drive?" Janet asked, genuine concern in her voice. "You look dead on your feet." Clarissa managed a tired smile. "I've got to pick up Miguel from daycare. Besides, I've driven on less sleep than this." It wasn't a boast. It was simply the reality of being a single mother working 2 jobs to make ends meet. As she drove through the awakening city, Clarissa's mind wandered to her 5-year-old son. Miguel would be excited to see her, would want to tell her about his dreams, about what he planned to build with his Legos. She'd have to muster energy. She didn't have to be present for him, to be the mother he deserved, despite the exhaustion that seemed to live in her bones. The radio played softly, some morning talk show discussing the latest political tensions, something about police reform and community relations. Clarissa turned it down. She had enough real-world problems without adding the weight of society's bigger issues to her already full plate. Traffic was building as office workers began their commutes, and Clarissa found herself stopped at red lights that seemed to stretch forever. Her eyes burned, and she rubbed them with the back of her hand, careful not to smudge the minimal makeup she'd applied 16 hours earlier. The AC in her car had been making strange noises lately, another expense she couldn't afford, but couldn't ignore much longer. 3 more blocks to Sunshine Daycare. 3 more blocks, and she could scoop Miguel into her arms, inhale the sweet scent of his hair, and remember why every sleepless night and aching muscle was worth it. He was her anchor, her reason for pushing through when everything else felt impossible. The neighborhood around the daycare was transitioning, like much of Chicago. Old brick buildings stood next to new developments, longtime residents mixed with young professionals, and everyone was just trying to find their place in a city that never stopped changing. Clarissa had grown up not far from here, in a house that had been torn down to make way for a coffee shop that charged $6 for what her grandmother used to make for pennies. As she turned onto Maple Street, Clarissa noticed there seemed to be more activity than usual. A few people were standing on corners, some with phones out, but she was too tired to process what that might mean. All she could think about was Miguel's gap-toothed smile and, maybe if she was lucky, a 2-hour nap before she had to start getting ready for her evening shift at the diner. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows between the buildings. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed, a sound so common in the city that it barely registered anymore. Just another day in Chicago, Clarissa thought, as she approached what should have been the final turn toward the daycare. But nothing about this day would be ordinary. Officer Marcus Thompson had been on the force for 8 years, but mornings like this still set his nerves on edge. The yellow tape stretched across 3 blocks, sealing off the area around what had been, until yesterday evening, just another corner convenience store. Now it was a crime scene, and Marcus found himself assigned to perimeter control, keeping civilians out, while detectives processed evidence from an armed robbery that had turned into something much more serious. The August heat was already building, even at 7:30 in the morning, and Marcus could feel sweat forming under his bulletproof vest. He'd been standing at this corner for 2 hours, redirecting traffic and explaining to frustrated residents why they couldn't access their usual routes. Most people were understanding once he explained the situation, but patience wore thin when people were trying to get to work, or, like the elderly man 20 minutes ago, to a doctor's appointment they'd been waiting months for. Marcus checked his radio, listening to the chatter between units. The investigation was progressing slowly. These things always did. Every piece of evidence had to be cataloged, every witness interviewed, every angle of the scene photographed and documented. It was methodical work that couldn't be rushed, regardless of how inconvenient it was for the neighborhood. "Thompson, you got someone approaching from the east," crackled through his radio. Marcus looked up to see a small car turning the corner, heading directly toward the tape. He raised his hand, expecting the driver to see the obvious police presence and stop. The squad cars, the yellow tape, the officers in uniform. It should have been clear that this was not a place for civilian traffic, but the Honda Civic kept coming. Marcus stepped forward, his hand moving instinctively toward his belt, not for his weapon, but for his radio. This was probably just someone who wasn't paying attention, maybe on their phone or distracted by something else. It happened more often than people might think, drivers so caught up in their own worlds that they missed obvious signs that they needed to stop. But as the car got closer, Marcus felt his training kick in. In a post-9/11 world, in a climate where attacks on police had become more common, any vehicle approaching a secured perimeter had to be treated as a potential threat until proven otherwise. It wasn't paranoia, it was survival. "Ma'am, stop your vehicle," Marcus called out, his voice carrying the authority that came from years of de-escalating potentially dangerous situations. The car slowed, but didn't stop immediately. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. The Honda came to a halt about 15 feet from the tape. Marcus could see the driver now, a woman, Hispanic, wearing what looked like medical scrubs. She appeared to be alone in the vehicle, but Marcus couldn't be sure. His training had taught him that assumptions could be deadly. "Turn off your engine and step out of the vehicle," Marcus commanded, his voice louder now. He was aware that several other officers had turned their attention to the situation, and he could see civilians on the sidewalk beginning to take notice. Some were already pulling out their phones. Marcus felt the familiar weight of being watched, judged, recorded. Every interaction he had with the public carried the potential to be scrutinized, dissected, and used to represent something larger than the moment itself. The badge on his chest felt heavier in these moments, carrying not just the responsibility of law enforcement, but the weight of history, of perception, of a community's complicated relationship with the police. The woman stepped out of her car slowly, her hands visible, and Marcus could see now that she looked exhausted. Her scrubs were rumpled, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that had seen better days. She looked like someone who had been working all night, someone who was just trying to get through her day. I'm sorry," she called out, her voice carrying a slight accent and genuine confusion. "I was just trying to get to the daycare. I saw the cars, but I didn't realize—" Marcus kept his position, professional but alert. "Ma'am, this is a restricted area. You need to turn around and find an alternate route." "But I need to pick up my son," she said, and Marcus could hear the fatigue in her voice, a kind of bone-deep tiredness that came from working too hard for too long. "I just got off work, and the daycare is right there, just 2 blocks over. I'm supposed to pick him up by 8, or they charge late fees." The mention of late fees hit Marcus in an unexpected place. He remembered his own mother, working double shifts at the hospital, rushing to pick him up from after-school care, always worried about the extra charges they couldn't afford. He remembered the stress in her voice when she talked about money, the way she'd count and recount the bills on the kitchen table after she thought he was asleep. But this was still a secured perimeter, and he still had a job to do. Marcus looked at the woman standing beside her car, hands still partially raised in a gesture of surrender and confusion. and something shifted in his perspective. The morning light caught the hospital ID badge clipped to her scrub pocket. Presbyterian Hospital, the same place where his mother had worked for 15 years before her retirement. The crowd of onlookers was growing. Marcus could see phones pointed in their direction, that familiar sight that made every police interaction feel like a performance where any wrong move could be broadcast to the world within minutes. But looking at this woman, Clarissa, he could see her name tag now. He wasn't thinking about the cameras or the potential for misunderstanding. He was thinking about his mother. Sandra Thompson had worked the night shift at Presbyterian for most of Marcus's childhood. He remembered waiting for her to pick him up from school, watching the clock tick past the scheduled time, knowing she was probably held up by an emergency or a patient who needed extra care. He remembered the exhaustion in her eyes when she finally arrived, the way she'd apologize, even though it wasn't her fault, the way she'd still find energy to ask about his day and help with his homework, even when she was dead on her feet. "Ma'am," Marcus said, his voice softer now, but still maintaining the authority his position required. "I understand you're trying to get to your son, but this area is closed off due to an ongoing investigation. It's for everyone's safety." Clarissa's shoulders sagged slightly. "How long will it be closed? I mean, I can find another way, but the daycare is right there, and I'm already running late," and her voice trailed off, and Marcus could see she was fighting back tears of frustration and exhaustion. Marcus glanced around at his fellow officers. Detective Rodriguez was deep in conversation with the crime scene technicians. Officer Kim was directing traffic at the other end of the block. No one was paying particular attention to this interaction anymore. It had been categorized as a routine civilian misdirection, handled appropriately, but Marcus couldn't shake the image of his mother in those same scrubs, carrying that same bone-deep tiredness, trying to balance the impossible demands of single parenthood and financial survival. He remembered the daycare late fees that would throw off their budget for weeks, the way his mother would apologize to him for things that weren't her fault. "What's your son's name?" Marcus asked. "Miguel," Clarissa replied, surprised by the question. "He's 5. He'll be starting kindergarten next month, and he gets worried when I'm late. The daycare workers are nice, but he doesn't understand why sometimes I can't be there exactly when I say I will." Marcus nodded. He understood that too. He remembered being 6 years old, watching the other kids get picked up, wondering if something had happened to his mother, if she was okay, if he'd done something wrong that made her late. "Look," Marcus said, stepping closer and lowering his voice so their conversation became more private, despite the public setting. "The investigation could take a few more hours, but there's a way around this that won't add too much time to your route." He pulled out a small notepad and quickly sketched a map of the surrounding streets. "If you go back to Madison, take that east to Clark, then north on Clark to Division, you can loop around and come at the daycare from the other direction. It'll add maybe 10 minutes to your drive, but you'll avoid all of this." Clarissa looked at the map, then back at Marcus. "Thank you," she said, and he could hear genuine relief in her voice. "I'm sorry I didn't realize what was happening here. It's been a long night, and I wasn't paying attention like I should have been." "It happens," Marcus said. "People get tired, they're focused on where they need to be, no harm done." But as Clarissa started to turn back toward her car, Marcus found himself thinking about something else his mother had taught him, that sometimes, when you have the power to make someone's hard day a little easier, you should use it. "Ma'am," he called out, "hang on just a second." The crowd was still watching, phones still recording. Marcus was acutely aware that whatever happened next would likely be viewed and judged by people who weren't there, who didn't understand the full context, who would bring their own assumptions and biases to their interpretation of events. But he was also thinking about Miguel, a 5-year-old boy waiting at daycare for his mother, who worked all night to provide for him. He was thinking about his own mother, and all the mothers like her, who did impossible things every day just to keep their children safe and fed and loved. Marcus made a decision that would surprise everyone watching, including himself. Marcus looked around the perimeter one more time. The crime scene investigation was proceeding normally. His fellow officers were handling their assigned tasks, and the crowd of onlookers was maintaining a respectful distance. Behind the tape, everything was under control. "Actually," Marcus said to Clarissa, "let me see if I can help you out a different way." He walked over to Detective Rodriguez, who was coordinating with the forensics team near the convenience store. "Rodriguez, I've got a situation here. Working mother trying to get to daycare pickup, been on shift all night at Presbyterian. Is there any way we can escort her through the secured area? She just needs to get 2 blocks over." Detective Rodriguez looked up from his clipboard, glanced over at Clarissa standing by her car, then back at Marcus. "Thompson, you know we can't just let civilians through a crime scene perimeter." "I know," Marcus said. "But look at her, man. She's dead on her feet. Probably been working all night saving lives, and now she's got to drive 15 minutes out of her way when her kid is literally 2 blocks from here. And you know they're going to hit her with late fees she probably can't afford." Rodriguez studied Marcus for a moment. They'd worked together for 3 years, and Rodriguez had never known Marcus to bend rules lightly. "What are you thinking?" "What if I escort her? Walk her car through the perimeter, make sure she doesn't go anywhere near the actual scene, just straight through on Maple to get to the daycare. Takes 5 minutes, and we maintain security." Rodriguez considered this. The crime scene itself was contained to the convenience store and the immediate area around it, the street. They'd need to traverse was 2 blocks away from any evidence or sensitive areas. "You sure about this, Thompson? You know how things can look, especially with the cameras." Marcus glanced back at the crowd of onlookers, many still recording with their phones. He was well aware that his next actions would likely be scrutinized, analyzed, and potentially misunderstood by people who weren't there and didn't know the full story. But he was also aware of Clarissa, standing by her car with hospital ID badge and exhausted eyes, just trying to get to her 5-year-old son. "I'm sure," Marcus said. Rodriguez nodded slowly. "All right, but you stay with her the whole time, and if anything feels off, you abort and reroute her the long way." "Understood." Marcus walked back to Clarissa, who was leaning against her car, clearly fighting to stay awake. "Ma'am, I talked to my supervisor. We're going to escort you through the perimeter so you can get to your son, but I need you to follow my instructions exactly." "Understood." Clarissa straightened up, surprised. "Really? You'd do that?" "My mother worked nights at Presbyterian for 15 years, Marcus said simply. "I know what it's like." As they prepared for the escort, Marcus could feel the weight of the watching crowd, could almost hear the social media posts being composed in real time. In today's climate, any interaction between police and civilians carried the potential for misinterpretation. A black officer helping a Hispanic mother could be seen as positive community policing, or it could be criticized as favoritism, or it could be twisted into something entirely different depending on who was telling the story. But looking at Clarissa, Marcus realized he didn't care about the potential backlash. This wasn't about optics or community relations or political statements. This was about a tired mother trying to get to her child and a police officer who remembered what it felt like to be that child waiting. "Stay in your car, follow directly behind me, and don't stop for anything until I tell you to," Marcus instructed. "We're going to walk you straight through to the other side of the perimeter." Clarissa got back in her Honda, started the engine, and waited for Marcus's signal. Marcus began walking, his pace deliberate and professional, leading her car through the secured area. They passed other officers who nodded acknowledgement, past the crime scene tape, past the convenience store where detectives were still gathering evidence. As they walked, Marcus found himself thinking about the complexity of his job in 2024. Every day brought new challenges, new scrutiny, new expectations. The badge he wore represented different things to different people. Authority, protection, oppression, hope, often simultaneously. He'd chosen this profession because he wanted to serve his community, to be the kind of officer he'd wished for in his own neighborhood growing up. Sometimes that meant enforcing laws and maintaining order. Sometimes it meant de-escalating tense situations. And sometimes, like today, it meant recognizing a fellow human being who just needed a small kindness. to get through a difficult moment. They reached the other side of the perimeter where Maple Street opened up again to normal traffic. Marcus signaled for Clarissa to stop and approached her window. "Daycare is 2 blocks that way," he said, pointing east. "Drive safe and get some rest when you can." Clarissa looked up at him through her window, and Marcus could see tears in her eyes, not from fear or frustration this time, but from something else entirely. "Thank you," she said. This means more than you know. Miguel gets so worried when I'm late, and I just—" "Thank you? My mother did the same thing for me that you're doing for Miguel," Marcus replied. "Take care of yourself, ma'am. That little boy needs you healthy." As Clarissa drove away toward the daycare, Marcus turned back towards the perimeter. He could see some of the onlookers dispersing, phones being put away, the moment of drama apparently over. He knew that somewhere video of this interaction was probably already being uploaded, captioned, shared, and interpreted by people who hadn't been there. He hoped they'd get it right. He hoped they'd see what he'd seen, not a police officer and a civilian, not a black man and a Hispanic woman, not a symbol of systemic anything, but 2 human beings who'd found a moment of understanding in a complicated world. But mostly he hoped that Miguel got to hug his mother without having to worry about why she was late. Marcus walked back to his position at the perimeter, ready to continue his shift. In a few hours, the crime scene would be processed, the tape would come down, and the neighborhood would return to normal. The video of his interaction with Clarissa would make its rounds on social media, generating comments and reactions from people with strong opinions about police, community relations, and the state of society. Some would praise his compassion, others would question his judgment. Many would use the moment to support whatever larger narrative they already believed about law enforcement in America. But for Marcus, it wasn't about any of that. It was about remembering that behind every uniform, every badge, every interaction, there were human beings trying to do right by each other in whatever small ways they could. And sometimes that was enough to make a difference in someone's day. 3 blocks away, Clarissa pulled into the parking lot of Sunshine Daycare, 10 minutes before the late fee deadline. Miguel would be waiting inside, probably building something elaborate with blocks or drawing pictures of superheroes. In a few minutes, she'd scoop him into her arms, listen to his excited chatter about his morning, and drive home to steal a few hours of sleep before her evening shift. The video of her encounter with Officer Thompson would indeed go viral, accumulating millions of views and thousands of comments. Some would see it as a heartening example of police humanity. Others would debate whether special treatment had been given based on her profession or appearance. News outlets would pick up the story, adding their own angles and interpretations. But none of that mattered to Miguel, who only cared that his mother had kept her promise to pick him up, that she was safe, and that they could go home together. And maybe, in the end, that's what mattered most of all.